Good morning and welcome everyone to the Tree, the Sky, the Sun, a pathway towards Malaysia's carbon neutral future launch event. My name is Frida Liu and I'll be your host this morning. Before we start, here are some quick safety reminders. Safety is our main priority. While attending the webcast today, please take a moment to look at your surroundings and ensure that you and those under your care are in a safe area. Ensure you can hear the fire alarm if you have your headset on and know where the nearest emergency exits are. Also, please do not take part in this webcast while driving. Here are some technical guides to ensure you have a better experience in this virtual setting. First off, make sure your internet connection is stable. If you experience issues streaming, please try refreshing the page. For a better viewing experience, you may enlarge the presentation window to full screen by clicking on the bottom right button, and please feel free to submit your questions for the speakers in the right box. Please note that this session is being recorded. For your information, we'll be having some poll questions throughout today's session, and we'll be using Mentimeter. You can access the questions via the panel on the right of this webcast or at www.menti.com using the Menti code 96395337, 96395337. Now, let's get a gauge of how everyone is feeling this morning. And our first question for the day is, how are we feeling? We've got the choices here of optimistic, great, now that I'm vaccinated, could be better. And we'll get to everyone's responses in just a while to get you acquainted with Mentimeter. Malaysia can achieve net zero emissions by 2065. The Tree, the Sky, the Sun, a pathway towards Malaysia's carbon neutral future, is a story of how the country could reach sky carbon neutral by 2065 with its unique advantages of tree and sun. Developed by Shell Malaysia in consultation with key local stakeholders, the Tree, the Sky, the Sun describes a challenging but technically possible pathway to decarbonize Malaysia. By recognizing and understanding the important levers in this journey, we hope that this story sparks discussion and adds to a national conversation about the energy transition. A roundtable discussion in the second half of the launch is part of a collaboration with CEO Action Network, CAN, and Climate Governance Malaysia. For context, this roundtable will be the first session for energy sector deliberations, of which there are 5 roundtables planned, and the eventual outcome for all roundtables would be to deliver a set of private sector net zero policy recommendations to the Malaysian government in the lead up to COP26. Now, CAN is a coalition of Malaysian corporate leaders with a purpose to shape policies, win stakeholders, and create a favorable ecosystem for sustainable businesses and sustainable development in Malaysia, while Climate Governance Malaysia is the country chapter of the Climate Governance Initiative started by the World Economic Forum, which advocates boards of directors. As we sit here together virtually, it's a stark contrast when we first mooted this conversation at a physical event in 2019, and what has happened around the world should indeed make us sit up and pay attention to this very pertinent issue. Now, let's have a look at how everyone's doing. All right. Okay, that's a lot of us who could be better. Yes, we could all be better. Anyway, I'm happy to see that a lot of people are also optimistic and that we've also gotten vaccinated. Let's begin today's session with the Dua recitation.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursaleen. Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Allahumma taqabbal minna salatana wa du'aana innaka antas sami'ul alim wa tub alayna innaka antat tawwabur rahim. We praise to you, Ya Allah, for giving us the opportunity to be part of this beautiful day on the launching of the tree, the sky, the sun. Ya Allah, let this be a day that you're happy with us and with the work we have put through to make this ceremony a success, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, Ya Rabbi, we ask you to grant us goodness on this day and all of our other days, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, we ask you to grant us rahmah and mercy. We ask you to forgive us for all our own, our parents, our friends, and our colleagues' wrongdoings, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, grant us good health, grant us barakah, and grant us blessing in everything you have given us. Allahumma ya Kareem ya Aziz. We hope that all our hard work and the prayers will make us become a better human being, with high integrity, politeness, with our words and our actions towards our friends, our colleagues, and to the people around us, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, grant us sincerity in our heart while we perform our task, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, Ya Ghani, Ya Hamid. May you grant us the will to work persistently for us to always improve our potential and have great achievement in our field, for this organization to be much stronger and much united, Ya Allah. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين.
And first off, we are very honored joining us this morning and to give us his welcome remarks, His Excellency Art Jacobi, the Netherlands Ambassador.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Art Jacobi and I'm the Netherlands Ambassador to Malaysia. And welcome to everyone present with us today for the launch of Shell Malaysia's The Tree, the Sky, the Sun, a pathway to Malaysia's carbon neutral journey. The Netherlands Embassy Malaysia is pleased to co-host this event with Shell and with the support of the Malaysian-Dutch Business Council. We are honored to have the participation of YB Dato Sri Tuan Ibrahim Tuan Man, Minister of Environment and Water, who will be providing today's keynote address and officiating today's proceedings. We look forward to hearing from him. Against the backdrop of a global pandemic, actions to address various socio-economic challenges have never been more urgent. Globally, we have an opportunity to rebuild our economy in a way which is environmentally sustainable and socially inclusive. Human health and environmental health are deeply intertwined. And so our recovery efforts from COVID-19 and in managing the climate challenge should also be mutually reinforcing. In the run-up to the 26th UN Climate Change Conference of Parties in November, and with the threat of COVID-19 ever looming, governments all around the world, including the Netherlands, now have an opportunity to shape the 21st century in ways that are clean, just, safe, and more resilient. Global demand is on the rise for technical solutions to address climate challenges. The Netherlands aims to lead the way in the development of smart, clean, and energy-efficient technologies. Shell, as an Anglo-Dutch corporate citizen headquartered in the Netherlands, is an active and key player in the global energy transition. Shell plays an important role in supporting countries in their transitions to net zero by incubating and investing into innovative, low-carbon technologies and working directly with customers to stimulate demand for low-carbon products. This morning we have a full and exciting agenda where we will not only launch and share key insights from Shell's The Tree, the Sky, the Sun, but also hear about Malaysia's journey and engage in a deep conversation about how the country can enhance its efforts to create a sustainable low-carbon future. With representation from government, industry and civil society, I look forward to a rich and engaging roundtable discussion later on about how we get to a carbon-neutral Malaysia. I'd like to take a moment to recognize our roundtable partners, CEO Action Network and Climate Governance Malaysia, who have been working tirelessly to bring together stakeholders from across the public and private spectrum to engage in these important conversations. Indeed, I believe each of us instinctively knows that a challenge as vast and wide-reaching as climate change requires all of us to work together more intensively and more creatively than ever before. And I'm heartened to see the diversity around the virtual room today. Now, a few words about the tree, the sky and the sun. I believe that this piece of work, developed by Shell, but with defining input from key Malaysian stakeholders, is so timely and so important. The tree, the sky, the sun presents us with a pathway for Malaysia to achieve the goal of carbon neutrality, while also continuing to grow its economy and provide a decent quality of life for its citizens. The value of this work is certainly in its key insights into Malaysia's decarbonization journey. But beyond that, it is the discussions and discourse that this work can engender that will truly bring about the necessary consensus for commitment to working together and form the foundation of Malaysia's pathway to a sustainable, carbon-neutral future. Society needs a comprehensive and inclusive blueprint for a cleaner and greener post-COVID world. I see today as the start of a meeting of minds in Malaysia with the aim to do exactly that. The Netherlands Embassy looks forward to continue our collaboration with key stakeholders in support of Malaysia's journey towards that carbon-neutral future. I thank you all for joining us virtually today and look forward to meet you again in the future and then hopefully physically. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And now to talk about the tree, the sky, the sun, please help me welcome Shell Malaysia Chairman Ivan Tan.
The Most Honourable Datuk Seri Tuan Ibrahim Tuan Man, Minister of Environment and Water, His Excellency Art Jacoby, Ambassador of the Netherlands to Malaysia, the Honourable Datuk Seri IR Dr. Zaini Ujang, Secretary General of the Ministry of Environment and Water, distinguished guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning to everyone, and thank you all for joining us at the launch of Shell Malaysia's The Tree, the Sky, the Sun, a pathway towards Malaysia's carbon neutral future. Let me first start by thanking our guest of honor, Yang Berhormat Datuk Seri, for his presence here today. The Tree, the Sky, the Sun has benefited greatly from the perspectives and inputs from officers of your ministry as well as other government agencies. And I sincerely look forward to strengthening our collaboration into the future. Many of us here are part of the energy business, and we would all agree that energy is a key factor in fueling global growth and development. Against the backdrop of an ongoing pandemic, let me take a moment to acknowledge that we are confronted with a challenging outlook for the future. The energy sector, though, has an important role to play in the economic recovery for our country in the short term. In the medium term, we must also tackle the challenges of providing much more energy while producing much less carbon emissions. The 2015 Paris Agreement is the most significant blueprint for the world to hold a rise in global temperature to well below 2 degrees C, with a stretch goal of 1.5 degrees C. Making this enormous shift in the energy system is not going to be easy. With the future being so complex and unpredictable, Shell believes that the best approach to exploring clean energy transition pathways is to use what we call scenarios. Now, scenarios are not policy proposals. They do not argue for what should be done, nor are they forecasts of what will be done by society, industry, or anyone else. Instead, scenarios offer descriptions of what could be done. They are the alternative stories of the future, which could help us learn useful lessons for the present. To crystallize a pathway to meet the Paris Agreement, Shell first published the Sky scenario in 2018, and it featured an energy system modeling for the entire world over the next century. In 2019, Shell Malaysia was inspired to develop an aspirational scenario that was unique to the conditions in our country. We joined forces with key local stakeholders in Malaysia's energy system to develop that story of the tree, the sky, the sun. This Malaysia scenario uses data and analysis based on the Shell Sky scenario and World Energy Model work, validated by discussions with a diverse group of Malaysian stakeholders. It tells us the story of how Malaysia can reach for the sky, carbon neutrality by 2065, using our country's unique advantages of the tree and the sun. Now, ladies and gentlemen, by 2065, the story of the tree, the sky, the sun tells us that the Malaysian energy system will look significantly different from what it is today. carbon pricing or the introduction of the external cost of carbon will be critical to mobilize that change required to achieve a carbon neutral economy. Our scenario also envisages that carbon pricing will be phased in starting from 2026 and coinciding with the start of the 13th Malaysia Plan. This will drive reallocation of capital and resources towards lower carbon and energy efficient choices, which helps the shift of how our energy is produced and consumed today. On the production side, renewable sources will make up close to 80% of the total energy mix, with solar becoming our biggest single largest source of energy by 2065. Coal will be phased out, while oil and natural gas will form the remaining 20% of the energy mix, with natural gas primarily acting as a means of supporting renewables, especially to mitigate the intermittency risks. In the tree, the sky, the sun, Malaysia continues to experience healthy economic and population growth. The country's increase in final energy demand is only marginal compared to 2020 as a result of gains that we make in energy efficiency. The ratcheting of policies and incentives to promote energy efficiency in the early 2020s affects all sectors of the economy, encouraging the use of high efficiency equipment and appliances, energy efficient buildings and industrial processes. Consequently, the share of electricity across all economic sectors, be it residential or industrial, grows to 50% from 21% today, enabled by large-scale solar power generation. In fact, solar becomes so affordable that almost all homes are powered by solar-powered battery grid systems all across Malaysia's green cities and townships. Fuels will continue to play a role in meeting the demand of difficult to electrify sectors, like in aviation and in shipping. With the significant improvements in battery technology, along with the lower cost of batteries, more electric vehicles will take to the roads. More than 70% of passenger road transportation is expected to run on electricity by 2065. And hydrogen starts to emerge in the 2030s as a fuel for industry and transport. By 2065, heavy-duty road transport will rely on a hybrid mix of biofuels and hydrogen. With rail transportation and last-mile public transportation becoming so efficient, many Malaysians in and near urban areas will now choose not to drive their cars to work. Welcome news indeed for those of us who just hate being stuck in traffic every day. In addition to the advances imagined so far in carbon pricing, renewables, energy efficiency, and electrification, there is one more critical lever in this journey. At first, the pathway identified by Shell in our consultations with local stakeholders saw Malaysia achieving carbon neutrality only by the year 2080. Through further discussions and engagements, the team incorporated the critical role of Malaysia's forests as a natural carbon sink. Malaysia has the potential to reforest up to 19,000 square kilometers, which could help to remove up to 29 million tons of carbon dioxide annually from our atmosphere. This level of reforestation would increase the country's forest cover by up to 6%, and in doing so, accelerates our pathway to carbon neutrality by 15 years to the year 2065. Ladies and gentlemen, in the journey imagined by the tree, the sky, the sun, the 5 key increase levers thus emerges for Malaysia to achieve carbon neutral emissions: reforestation, carbon pricing, energy efficiency, electrification, and renewables, especially solar. Now, please allow me now to emphasize the 2 key points from our story thus far. The first point is that no individual player will be able to make this shift to a sustainable energy system on its own. That essential task will require close and cross-sector collaboration between government, businesses, and consumers. Collaboration will be essential to get the job done, but also to ensure that collective action is comprehensive and balanced. The second point is that there will likely be other possible pathways, but we must together make choices today that start to significantly shift the way we produce and consume energy. The impact of the rise in global temperatures, if left unchecked, will increasingly become a great concern for all of us. I believe that global energy companies like Shell have a responsibility to society to discuss energy and climate issues openly and in a transparent way. With our publication of The Tree, the Sky, the Sun, Shell hopes to share the optimism of this pathway to carbon neutrality, but also to recognize the joint challenges and efforts that are required to do this and achieve this together. This story is merely the start of a more transparent and open conversation for all of us. We can be the generation that will take on the challenge of providing more and cleaner energy solutions for Malaysia and for our planet. Energy that is much needed to meet the needs of diverse Malaysians, but with fewer carbon emissions, and in the process, transforming the quality of life for millions of people. Now that is quite a calling, and I hope that all of you will be part of this exciting opportunity. Shell hopes to have this forum again next year, and for many years to come in our journey towards a carbon neutral future. On behalf of Shell Malaysia, thank you all for joining us this morning, and we look forward to building a safer, cleaner, and energy-rich future for Malaysia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ivan. And also for all of you who have just joined us, thank you for your questions that are coming through. We will address them during the panel discussion a little later, but we're also going to go to the Menti poll, and we love your feedback and thoughts. And of course, this will also be addressed during the panel discussion. Our poll question is 2065, the right year that Malaysia should aim for to achieve carbon neutrality. You've got a couple of options there, no, yes, and I don't know. And another question is rank the following in terms of priority for Malaysia's carbon neutral journey, and we'd love to hear your feedback. And with that, for our keynote address, I'd like to call upon the Minister of Environment and Water, Yang Berhormat Datuk Seri Tuan Ibrahim Tuan Man, to address us. Yang Berhormat.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. His Excellency Jacobi Duta Belanda ke Malaysia, yang berbahagia Datuk Seri Senior Dr. Zaini Ujang, Ketua Setiausaha Kementerian Alam Sekitar dan Air, yang bahagia Dr. Nagulendran, anak laki-laki Kanyagat Rasu, Timbalan Ketua Setiausaha Alam Sekitar, Kementerian Alam Sekitar dan Air, yang berusaha Encik Ivan Tan, Pengerusi Shell Malaysia, Yang Mulia Tengku Taufik Tengku Aziz, Presiden Petronas merangkap Pengerusi CEO Action Network, yang bahagia Datin Seri Sunita Rajakumar, Pengasas Climate Governance Malaysia CGM, yang berusaha Encik Marco Winter, Pengarah Eksekutif Malaysia Business Council, rakan-rakan seperjuangan alam sekitar dan perubahan iklim, rakan-rakan media, tuan-tuan dan puan-puan yang dihormati sekalian. Saya memulakan ucapan ini dengan mengajak kita semua merenungi firman Allah Ta'ala dalam surah Ali Imran ayat 190. Firman Allah Ta'ala, Inna fi khalqis samawati wal ard wa ikhtilafil laili wan nahar la ayatil liulil albab. Maksudnya, sesungguhnya dalam penciptaan langit dan bumi serta pertukaran malam dan siang memberi tanda-tanda kekuasaan Allah bagi orang yang berakal. Alhamdulillah, mari kita sama-sama memanjatkan kesyukuran kehadrat Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala kerana diberi peluang untuk berkumpul secara maya dalam majlis yang penuh bermakna ini. Terima kasih pihak penganjur, Kedutaan Belanda di Malaysia, Shell Malaysia dan Malaysia Business Council kerana menjemput saya dan pihak Kementerian Alam Sekitar dan Air untuk menghadiri majlis pelancaran buku The Tree, the Sky, the Sun, hala tuju Malaysia ke arah pembangunan rendah karbon. Tuan-tuan dan puan-puan sekalian, sebagaimana kita semua sedia maklum, pandemik COVID-19 telah menatijahkan impak sosial dan ekonomi yang cukup besar, sama di peringkat global maupun di peringkat nasional. Semua negara di dunia terkesan dan sedang berusaha untuk mengurangkan kesan pandemik kepada negara masing-masing. Walau bagaimanapun, menurut laporan Global Economic Prospect yang dikeluarkan oleh Bank Dunia baru-baru ini, ekonomi dunia dijangka akan berkembang pada kadar 5.6% pada tahun ini susulan program vaksinasi yang sedang giat dijalankan di seluruh dunia. Namun demikian, apa yang berlaku pada hari ini ialah tidak sekadar itu sahaja. Tapi kita semua sedang menempuh cabaran yang kritikal, iaitu isu perubahan iklim. Tuan-tuan dan puan-puan yang saya hormati, perubahan iklim berpunca daripada pelepasan gas rumah kaca ke atmosfera akibat daripada aktiviti manusia. Pengumpulan GHG bagi jangka masa panjang menyumbang kepada fenomena pemanasan global dan perubahan iklim secara global sehingga menyebabkan kejadian cuaca ekstrim di luar norma kebiasaan. Kebanyakan negara sedang membangun mengalami gelombang haba dan cuaca sejuk yang melampau dan banjir besar, tanah runtuh serta ribut taufan. Kajian yang dilaksanakan oleh panel antara kerajaan mengenai perubahan iklim atau IPCC menuntut komitmen pelbagai pemegang taruh untuk mengurangkan pelepasan GHG seperti yang telah ditetapkan dalam Perjanjian Paris di bawah Konvensyen Rangka Kerja Perubahan Iklim Pertubuhan Antarabangsa Badan-Badan Bangsa-Bangsa Bersatu atau UNFCCC. Malaysia menyasarkan kadar pengurangan intensiti pelepasan GHG sebanyak 45% berbanding keluaran negara dalam negara kasar menjelang tahun 2030. Berdasarkan sasaran ini, sebanyak 35% akan dilaksanakan tanpa syarat, manakala 10% lagi adalah bersyarat serta takluk kepada penerimaan peruntukan kewangan, pemindahan teknologi dan pembangunan kapasiti depan negara maju. Para hadirin sekalian, bagi merealisasikan sasaran tersebut, fokus utama kerajaan dalam jangka masa panjang adalah untuk mengurangkan pelepasan GHG di setiap sektor ekonomi melalui pelaksanaan dasar-dasar berkaitan mitigasi dan adaptasi perubahan iklim. Semua komitmen Malaysia dalam agenda perubahan iklim telah diterjemahkan dalam rangka kerja yang komprehensif, iaitu melalui penubuhan Majlis Tindakan Perubahan Iklim Malaysia atau MyCAC. Mesyuarat MyCAC yang pertama telah pun dipengerusikan oleh Yang Amat Berhormat Perdana Menteri Malaysia pada 13 April 2021. MyCAC telah pun bersetuju dengan 6 pendekatan, iaitu yang pertama mengukuhkan tabik urus negara terhadap perubahan iklim melalui penglibatan semua pihak yang berkepentingan. Yang kedua, melaksanakan pelbagai program untuk mendorong agenda perubahan iklim dengan menggerakkan sumber tenaga manusia dan peruntukan keuangan. Yang ketiga, memperkenalkan mekanisme pasaran karbon. Yang keempat, menjalin kerjasama dengan semua pihak berkepentingan untuk kementerian memenuhi komitmen, khususnya komitmen negara di bawah UNFCCC. Yang kelima ialah membangunkan agenda Green Recovery Plan ataupun Green New Deal supaya Malaysia akan menjadi hub utama di dalam bidang ekonomi, perkhidmatan dan teknologi hijau. Yang ketujuh ialah memupuk gaya hidup hijau dalam semua lapisan masyarakat melalui konsep kesihatan planet ke arah pembangunan lestari yang holistik. Tuan-tuan dan puan-puan sekalian, pada masa yang sama, KASA sedang menjalankan pelbagai program dan tindakan mengenai perubahan iklim melalui inisiatif berikut. Antaranya, yang pertama, mengutamakan pengemaskinian Nationally Determined Contribution atau NDC negara. Yang kedua ialah membangunkan pusat gas rumah kaca atau GHG kebangsaan. Yang ketiga, menyemak semula dasar perubahan iklim negara 2009. Yang keempat, membangunkan kerangka undang-undang perubahan iklim negara. Yang kelima, membangunkan mekanisme pasaran karbon negara. Yang keenam ialah membangunkan strategi pengurangan pelepasan GHG jangka masa panjang. Dan yang ketujuh ialah membangunkan NDC roadmap. Tuan-tuan sekalian, berdasarkan perkara tersebut, KASA sedang menyediakan garis panduan pasaran karbon dan polisi carbon pricing untuk memberi panduan yang jelas kepada mana-mana pihak yang ingin terlibat dalam pasaran karbon sukarela. Pihak kerajaan perlu memastikan bahawa aktiviti perdagangan karbon tidak menjejaskan pencapaian pengurangan pelepasan gas rumah kaca negara, khususnya bagi pencapaian NDC. Dalam hal ini adalah penting bagi Malaysia memuktamadkan NDC dan menyiapkan dokumen dasar yang berkaitan sebelum negara menetapkan hala tuju karbon atau carbon pathway dan mengumumkan pasaran atau sasaran baru negara bagi mencapai net zero. KASA juga menggalakkan sektor swasta untuk memperkenalkan inisiatif dan menetapkan sasaran pengurangan gas rumah kaca di peringkat organisasi masing-masing. KASA juga menyokong usaha dan inspirasi entiti korporat dan syarikat swasta seperti Shell Malaysia dalam mentransformasi operasi perniagaan hijau, seterusnya menuju ke arah pertumbuhan yang lebih mampan. Tahniah kepada Shell saya ucapkan. Tuan-tuan dan puan-puan yang saya hormati, Malaysia yang merupakan salah sebuah negara yang mencatat kadar perbandaran paling pesat di Asia turut mengorak langkah ke arah pembangunan bandar lestari. Justru Pelan Induk Bandar Rendah Karbon Negara akan dilaksanakan sebagai panduan asas dan hala tuju bagi kerajaan persekutuan dan negeri serta pihak berkuasa tempatan untuk melaksanakan agenda bandar rendah karbon. Baru-baru ini KASA juga telah melancarkan geran pemangkin bandar rendah karbon atau ringkasnya gerak bernilai 35 juta ringgit Malaysia untuk memperkasakan inisiatif bandar rendah karbon berimpak tinggi. Keutamaan diberikan kepada pihak berkuasa tempatan yang telah melaksanakan rangka kerja bandar rendah karbon atau LCCF yang diperkenalkan pada tahun 2011 dan menyertai cabaran bandar rendah karbon 2030 dalam kategori kawasan zon rendah karbon. KASA amat berharap geran tersebut menjadi pemangkin kepada agenda pertumbuhan hijau di peringkat akar umbi, di samping menjana lebih banyak peluang ekonomi hijau tempatan, mengurangkan kesan kepada alam sekitar dan meningkatkan kualiti hidup yang berkualiti di kalangan masyarakat. Dalam hal ini, penglibatan pihak swasta termasuk Shell Malaysia sangat-sangat dialu-alukan. Tuan-tuan dan puan-puan yang dihormati sekalian, memandangkan sektor pengangkutan juga merupakan antara sektor utama pelepasan GHG terbesar di Malaysia. Pelan pembangunan mobiliti rendah karbon 2021 hingga 2030 juga akan dilaksanakan di seluruh negara dan rangka dan jangka masa terdekat dengan kerjasama daripada pelbagai kementerian. Melalui pelan ini, pengurangan pelepasan GHG dianggarkan sebanyak 165 juta tan karbon dioksida setara dan akan menjimatkan sebanyak 165 juta tan karbon dioksida yang setara dan akan menjimatkan perbelanjaan bahan api sebanyak 150 bilion untuk tempoh 10 tahun. Beberapa strategi utama seperti penggunaan kereta, bas dan motosikal elektrik serta promosi mobiliti aktif adalah di antara usaha untuk mengurangkan penggunaan tenaga dan pelepasan GHG. Tuan-tuan dan puan-puan sekalian, kita juga mesti mengembeling tenaga dan sumber ke arah kelestarian alam sekitar serta memacu pembangunan rendah karbon negara. Program kesedaran dan pemupukan gaya hidup hijau perlu dipergiatkan di pelbagai lapisan masyarakat. Akhir kata, sekali lagi saya ingin mengucapkan tahniah dan syabas atas usaha dilaksanakan oleh Shell Malaysia dalam menerbitkan makalah khas untuk membantu membina naratif yang betul dalam memahami pembangunan negara yang lebih mampan. Dengan lafaz Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, saya dengan penuh sukacita melancarkan makalah khas yang bertajuk The Tree, The Sky, The Sun, hala tuju Malaysia ke arah pembangunan rendah karbon. Sekian, terima kasih. Semoga ianya sangat bermanfaat kepada kita semua. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh dan salam sejahtera.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
In Malaysia, we're going on a journey to meet our ambitious goal of net zero carbon emissions by 2065. The tree, the sky, the sun is a story of how we might reach that goal. Our journey begins in the 2020s, where we shift from aspiring to achieving, building on our environmental and economic strengths. We start our transformation to a low-carbon economy by protecting and reclaiming our natural carbon sink, our forests. We deregulate fuel prices and introduce carbon pricing, using the income to invest in more renewable and energy-efficient technologies.
Young people become our environmental champions, making greener lifestyle choices and leading the switch to electric mobility. Our efforts are backed by extensive public engagement and a national digital dashboard that enables everyone to track our progress and pull together as one. In the 2030s, we ramp up energy efficiency, electrification, and renewables, especially solar energy. Use of biofuels increases, especially in transport, while digitalization enables deep electrification and home generation to sell excess energy back to the grid. By 2040, coordination of policies, monitoring of performance, and fair enforcement of regulations is paying dividends. Together with open engagement with the public, there's a real sense of shared responsibility.
As we reach 2050, coal has been replaced completely. Transportation is 50% electrified, and we enjoy a highly efficient public transport system. Ecotourism thrives, creating a wealth of opportunities and employment. By 2065, together we've achieved our national net zero emissions goal. Along the journey, our country has been transformed. As the sun provides 50% of our energy and enables our forests to flourish, Malaysia has become a global leader in sustainability, a green home for generations to come. The journey of the tree, the sky, the sun starts today. Visit us online to find out more.
With that, we're pleased to announce the official launch of the Tree, the Sky, the Sun. Today's launch event is brought to you virtually from Wisma Shell in Cyberjaya, which you saw in the launch video. And Wisma Shell is a certified LEED Platinum building, one of the largest solar panel installations in Malaysia. That's 1,296 units and able to generate up to 421 kilowatts peak and offset carbon emissions by 360 metric tons per annum. To explore resources related to a tree, the sky, the sun, you can return to the virtual event portal where you'll find a link to the book as well as other material in the resources page. The links are now live and accessible. Alternatively, do visit the website shell.com.my/3skysun. Now, a few questions for you to mull over during the upcoming break. Again, you can answer them via the panel on the right of this webcast or at menti.com using the Menti code 9639-5337. That's 9639-5337. And we will get to those poll questions later. Now, we'll take a short 5-minute break and we'll return with a roundtable discussion on how do we get to a carbon neutral Malaysia. And we'll see you back here in 5 minutes at 10:45.
Kim? Kim, can we test Ivan's camera view, please? Kim, Andreen?
Welcome back to the launch of Tree, the Sky, the Sun by Shell Malaysia. Just a reminder, poll questions, you can answer them via the panel on the right of this webcast or at menti.com using the Menti code at 96395337. Before we proceed with the roundtable discussion, we'd like to hear from the CEO Action Network Chairman, Tengku Muhammad Taufik, President and Group CEO Petronas, to give us an update and to say a few words.
Yang Berhormat Datuk Seri Tuan Ibrahim Tuan Man, Minister of Environment and Water, KASA, His Excellency Art Jacoby, Ambassador of the Netherlands to Malaysia, Mr. Ivan Tan, Chairman of Shell Malaysia, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good day to everyone. On behalf of the CEO Action Network, or CAN, permit me to begin by conveying my sincere appreciation to our policymakers, energy and industry players and experts who have gathered here today to engage in dialogue in shaping a carbon-neutral pathway for Malaysia. I'm very pleased to have the presence of Yang Berhormat Datuk Seri Tuan Ibrahim Tuan Man, Minister of KASA, whose leadership in climate action and steer in the Malaysian Climate Action Council, chaired by the Prime Minister of Malaysia, have been valuable for CAN. I would also like to congratulate Shell Malaysia for the successful launch of the Tree, the Sky, the Sun, a pathway towards Malaysia's carbon-neutral future, outlining a potential carbon-neutral pathway for the Malaysian energy sector roundtable, organized by CAN together with Climate Governance Malaysia. With the theme, how do we get to a carbon-neutral Malaysia? I am both excited and confident that the collective capability and expertise gathered today will step up to the challenge in putting forward solutions for an effective and sustainable carbon-neutral future. Ladies and gentlemen, as a closed-door, peer-to-peer informal network of CEOs, CAN represents 45 leading businesses for more than 20 priority sectors in Malaysia who are focused on sustainability advocacy, capacity building, action, and performance. Our roundtable today is part of a series of open discourse with the government, private sectors, and key stakeholders. Following the success of our recent roundtables held with CASA in April and the Ministry of Finance in June, we have expanded our series to include other key economic sectors. These include energy, agriculture and plantation, property and construction, recycling and circularity, green lifestyle, as well as an open data to provide a platform for discussion on policies and efforts to strengthen our collective national climate ambition. In this spirit, I'm pleased to announce that CAN has in its pipeline 4 upcoming roundtables that will discuss low carbon mobility, renewables and electrification, carbon pricing and green financing, and protecting carbon sinks to drive greater momentum in our shared agenda for the energy sector. Ladies and gentlemen, the energy industry today has before it a monumental task of meeting growing energy needs that must be delivered while considering the energy trilemma of affordability, security, and sustainability. Driven by changing customer behaviors and heightened pressure from multi-stakeholders, the energy industry is required to demonstrate even greater accountability for its emissions and ability to transition aligned to the Paris Agreement. As many of you are only too aware, in the midst of this global COVID-19 pandemic, we witness fresh commitments from governments toward net zero carbon emissions by mid-century, including, among others, China, Japan, South Korea, and the European Union. Once these forward-looking commitments are translated into actual policy and regulation, we must contend with a changing operating environment spurred by requirements from financiers for businesses to be greener and cleaner, further compelling us to take stock of how we operate. As we have seen, these steps are already being strongly espoused by investors who prioritize environment, social, and governance initiatives. Amidst these challenges, I believe the energy transition presents a window of opportunity for countries to capture new growth where old sectors decline. New sectors will emerge from the advancements of technologies. Among these, we will include potential in energy efficiency, renewable energy, energy storage, low carbon mobility, circular economies, carbon capture and sequestration, the hydrogen economy, to name but a few. Therefore, it is important for Malaysia to act fast and decisively strengthen our climate ambition to unlock these opportunities. For example, countries such as Australia and Saudi Arabia are capturing high value-add green foreign direct investments in renewable energy and have taken positions in the hydrogen economy. For Malaysia, we must recognize our own potential through green hydrogen production in states like Sarawak as an avenue to compete for green FDIs. In new growth areas, such as electric vehicle or EV manufacturing, ASEAN countries like Singapore and Vietnam have announced highly attractive incentives for EV auto manufacturers. This has given them a first mover advantage ahead of Malaysia to be an EV auto manufacturing hub targeting export markets. Ladies and gentlemen, the ambitious carbon neutrality goal we envision for Malaysia can only materialize with a whole of society and all of government approach. Every segment of our society and economy will need to step up to meet the very real risks and opportunities which we face today. Government support and intervention, on the other hand, must take into consideration all key influencing factors to ensure an alignment of government policy between economic, climate, and energy priorities, while ensuring the socio-economic well-being of all Malaysians. Ultimately, the future of Malaysia's energy landscape requires coordinated and collective actions from all stakeholders to nurture an ecosystem for business not only to survive, but thrive in a shifting energy landscape. Shell Malaysia's The Tree, the Sky and the Sun, a pathway towards Malaysia's carbon neutral future, presents us with a starting point for our roundtable. Very likely, the actual outcome will evolve over time based on our country's context, decisions, and actions related to the key levers. What we need to recognize today is that it is imperative for us to make the necessary step changes towards supporting our nation's climate agenda through increased public and private sector collaboration. On that note, members of CAN will continue to engage with key stakeholders to strengthen and rally support for our national climate ambition. Before I end, allow me to express my appreciation once again to Yang Berhormat Datuk Seri Tuan Ibrahim Tuan Man and everyone for joining us today. It's my sincere hope that the open and meaningful dialogue today will be incorporated in the final report of recommendations for the government to carefully consider. With that, I look forward to the rich exchange of ideas and conversations as together we can put forward solutions for a shared sustainable future. Thank you, take care, stay safe. Wassalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Tengku. It's now time for that all-important roundtable discussion on how do we get to a carbon-neutral Malaysia, and may I add what action steps we have to take afterwards. And joining us for this, we have Secretary General of the Ministry of Environment and Water, Yang Berbahagia, Dato Sri Engineer Dr. Zaini Ujang, Datin Sri Sunita Rajakumar, Founding Chairperson, Climate Governance Malaysia, Dave Sivaprasad, Managing Director and Partner, Boston Consulting Group, and Ivan Tan, Chairman, Shell Malaysia. A recap before we begin. In the tree, the sky, the sun, the Malaysian energy system of 2065 will look significantly different from today. The economy-wide change required to achieve a carbon-neutral state will be underpinned by carbon pricing, or the external cost of carbon, which is phased in starting from 2026. Renewable sources of energy dominate the energy mix, with solar being the largest single source of energy, 40% of that energy mix. Deep electrification by hydrocarbons remain important. Electricity share grows to 50% of total energy consumption. Over 90% is generated from renewables, with the majority of that from solar. Passenger road transport is more than 70% electric. The country's increase in final energy demand compared to 2020 is marginal due to gains in energy efficiency. Remaining emissions will need to be removed using technology or nature. Reforestation of additional 5.8% of Malaysia's landmass, equivalent to 19,000 square kilometers or the size of Perak, captures 29 million tons of CO2 per year of remaining emissions. Now, before we get into the discussion, let's hear from our panelists. And for this, let me first welcome Secretary General of the Ministry of Environment and Water, Yang Berbahagia, Dato Sri Engineer Dr. Zaini Ujang. While we get this sorted out, maybe at this point, I'd like to invite Datin Sri Sunita. Yeah, I'll invite Datin Sri Sunita Rajakumar, Founding Chairperson, Climate Governance Malaysia, and then we'll revert back to Secretary General later. So over to you, Datin Sri.
Hi, Freda. Really nice to be here. Congratulations on Shell on launching this very important publication that's going to take our conversation to the next level. And thank you so much to CASA and the Malaysian Dutch Business Council as well. We're really gratified. Part of the reason why the Climate Governance Malaysia and CEO Action Network decided to start on this series of roundtable conversations is because we feel very strongly that this is a crisis that requires all of government and whole of society to participate in this conversation. I see Dato' Sri Zaini is back now, so should I pass the floor back to him?
You can proceed.
Okay. And so we've been gratified because the first ministry that we approached was actually Ministry of Environment and Water, and they fully understood and supported this. And so CASA launched the first roundtable session on the 12th of April. That was followed up on the 16th of April. The recordings are available on the CGM website. And this premise, all of government, whole of society approach, is a recognition that challenges faced are highly complex, not just planetary boundaries, concepts of common but differentiated responsibilities amongst the like-minded developing countries, intergenerational equity, and solutions that need to be iterated a few times to take into account unintended consequences, and trilemmas such as balancing security needs, affordability, and sustainability. This is unfortunately one of those situations where unless everybody wins the race, nobody wins the race. We have a situation where the economy and society simply cannot be separated from the environment. And so we need to provide certain guardrails using policy recommendations to ensure we stay on this sustainable pathway and avoid a more destructive path that will inflict damage on us and on future generations. So mainstreaming climate is about mobilizing action at all levels. there is a counter narrative of waiting a little longer, that science and technology will come up with solutions. And that is true. We still have gaps in solutions. We still need new technologies, but we need to see an increase in commitment from individuals, businesses, industries, countries. These problems are all interconnected. And the focus now is on managing and identifying trade-offs. For example, are we still considering this to be a mutually exclusive choice? Either we protect our environment or we grow our economy. Because there is this inseparable bond. Nature enables our productive capacity. So if nature thrives, so does our well-being. So how do we do both? So these are the things that we want to explore during the roundtable conversations and think of what policies should we be considering to enable a conducive environment for increased climate ambition? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sri. I'll now pass the floor over to Dr. Sri, Engineer.
Yeah, thank you very much for, sorry for the interruption. I think everyone must be able to understand this. This is the data that we have to not only able to understand, but able to work on it. And this data submitted by the Government of Malaysia as BUR, Biennial Update Reports, to United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. This was dated 30th of December 2020. So we reported 4 years back. So our reporting is X-4. And this is very important for us to reflect. First, the energy sector, including transportation, contributed up to close to 80% of the carbon emission or greenhouse gases in the country. So this is very alarming. And I think many countries doing the same. They are in the same situation except few countries in the world. And we have also experienced increase in land use and land use change and forestry from 3.32 to 17.8 within a span of 2 years. And this is very alarming as well. What I think more important for us to understand is our total emission became positive now from 49.28 million ton CO2 equivalent to 75. So on average, Malaysians are contributing a lot. We are emitting up to 10 tons CO2 per capita per year without land use change, and forestry. So this is something that we have to look into. When people try to benchmark between countries in the future, it's not only based on GDP per capita, but also gas emission per capita, carbon emission per capita. So our carbon emission has increased from 7 in the year 2014 to 10 in 2016. And we are at the moment trying to find ways and means how to deal with this. And if you look into historical data, this is the situation in Malaysia. We had our net zero in 2004. At that time, the carbon emission was not as high. And our offsetting value, which is land use and land use change and forestry removals, are almost constant, almost stable at that level. So from policy point of view, how can we enlarge the green component of LULUCF removals, which is plant more trees and be able to get less carbon emitted? So this is the challenge I put forward. So what government is trying to do now is mainly work on green technology to reduce our carbon emission and have more green cover for offsetting. Green technology includes various platform vehicles instead of relying on ICE, internal combustion engines, as well as sources of energy. Then I think that is not critical. What is more critical is how can we get a green lifestyle in the society? How can we promote circular economy in the society? So that is the most important subject for us to discuss. To merely having a statement, policy statement, we can do it very easily. I can't see difficulties in that, but question is how can we ensure that the policy can be implemented? People are doing it willingly, because this is about lifestyle. This is not about something that you can put people in jail because they are producing carbon emission. So this is not a crime from legal perspective. So how can you encourage people to do something good for the future? So I think this is our challenge, to create what I call climate culture, and at the same time we have very substantial climate financing ecosystem in the country. Thank you for giving me this chance to talk. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, back to you.
Thank
Frida.
you. Thank you very much, Dr. Sri. I'll now pass over the floor over to Dave.
Thank you, Freda, and thank you, Shell Malaysia, and congratulations on this landmark study. Thank you, CGM, Daphne Sunita, and the CAN network, and thank you to CASA, Dr. Sri Zaini, for your words. Maybe I'll just take a slightly different perspective, just to step back out of Malaysia and maybe share what we're seeing globally, and really this is really the right time to have this debate on shaping the pathway for Malaysia, and how do you continue to push the ambition. So if I reflect on globally what's happening, and it's really taken a lot of momentum over the last 12 months. Today, there are almost 130 countries that have committed to a net zero target. This is 60% of emissions globally that have a commitment, either as 2050 or soon after to 2060 and so on. Now, if you look at corporates, and this number grows on a daily basis, about 1,400 major corporates have committed to net zero. This is happening globally. Major funds have applied climate criteria in where they deploy investments. So you know, at the end of last year, this was something along the lines of $30 trillion of funds that are being allocated with a climate and a sustainability criteria. And what is also gaining a lot of momentum, and this really will be a major catalyst, is financial institutions and banks are committing to net zero on finance emissions, meaning that they will not finance, or they're working towards transitioning what they finance as low carbon versus high carbon investments. Now, all this is happening globally, and it's catalyzing action across. Regionally, we're seeing a lot of movement as well, and you'd have seen in Southeast Asia, Indonesia, which if you think about 12 months ago did not have climate on the agenda, is now talking about a net zero 2060, 2070 in the public domain. So this is also happening in the region. And companies in Southeast Asia, both in the energy field and outside, are looking seriously how they shift their business models, how they shift their portfolios, and how they grow and compete in a low carbon world. So all this is happening around us. So this is really the right time to look at the pathway for Malaysia and continue to push the ambition. And as Chairman Shell Ivan Tan, you mentioned, Malaysia is very well positioned on this long-term transition with forest sinks, with renewables. So there are a lot of competitive advantages the country has. And you have companies like Petronas who have been making commitments on net zero. So there are signs of both competitive advantage the country has and indications that the corporates, the investors, the sectors are starting to move in this direction. So the question really is, all this is happening around us. How does Malaysia capitalize on these opportunities? How does the country capture a positive growth path through transition? And how do you continue pushing the ambition further? And this Shell study landmark reference is a good input. The government has been shaping low carbon pathways through national energy policy. Ourselves in BCG, we've been collaborating with the WWF on looking at net zero pathways for the country, and particularly having a lens of, you know, what are the socioeconomic and macroeconomic impact this would have. So a lot of good input to really shape the agenda and the ambition for Malaysia looking ahead.
Thanks, Dave. I'll now pass on to Ivan to say a couple words before we begin the roundtable discussion.
Thanks, Freda, and thanks, Dato' Sri Sunita as well for sharing your thoughts around the trilemma and the trade-offs that we have to make. Dato' Sri, Dr. Zaini also, the bit around climate, culture and lifestyle really stuck for myself. And I guess, maybe building on from what Dave mentioned around corporates now starting to make net zero commitments, and 1400, I think was the number you quoted, Dave, earlier. And as a global energy business like Shell that's present across the energy value chain, I really do believe that we have a vital role to play in catalyzing this change. We've placed in our strategy sustainability at the heart of our business. We've set an industry-leading climate target to become a net zero emissions energy business by 2050, which encompasses our emissions across scopes 1, 2, and 3. And we're transforming our business to meet this target. So globally now, we're investing billions into lower carbon energy solutions like EV charging, renewable power, hydrogen, biofuels, etc. And we're working with our customers, more importantly, to decarbonize their businesses too, in aviation, shipping, freight, industry. In Malaysia, we are taking some early steps to establish positions in the areas of renewables, energy efficiency, e-mobility, and nature-based solutions in the area of conservation of our forests. Let me provide some specific examples here to share with all of yourselves. Firstly, in the renewable space, in the upstream business, we've partnered with Swift Energy to install our first solar-powered wellhead platform at our facility offshore in Sarawak on SK408. The platform is purpose-built with lower power consumption compared to other facilities, and it reduces our power consumption by up to 90%. In our retail sites, we've got now 150 retail stations with solar panels, and we plan to grow this to 300 retail stations in the short term. Our offices in Cyberjaya has been fitted with almost 1,300 solar panels, which is able to supply up to 15% of the location's energy consumption. Secondly, we also want to increase the energy efficiency of all our operations. 2 Shell retail stations now have been awarded with the Green Building Index certification in April 2019. And in December 2020, we opened our flagship retail station at Mid Hotel, which earned the provisional gold standard from the GBI organization. And we hope we will use as a benchmark for future stations to come. Our building in Menara Shell and Wisma Shell are both LEED Platinum certified buildings. We've also started our e-mobility business. Shell and Porsche Asia Pacific has recently announced implementation of Southeast Asia's first cross-border high-performance charging opportunity network with 12 charging points at 6 Shell locations across the Malaysia North-South Highway, which then offers electric vehicle drivers the opportunity for smooth and convenient travel between Singapore, KL, and Penang. And this will be rolled out in stages with 4 stations hopefully ready by the second half of this year, followed by 2 additional stations by the first half of 2022. Shell Recharge EV charging bays are also available at 7 locations in Klang Valley, and we've done that in partnership with Park Easy. In terms of conservation and preservation of forests, we continue to pursue projects in Malaysia, which we hope will be able to deliver really high quality carbon credits and benefits the climate, local communities, and biodiversity. It's important that we continue to work closely with third parties for these opportunities, together with the state governments of Pahang, Sarawak, and Sabah. Governments, of course, play a crucial role in enabling the transformation of our energy system with the long-term policies that can provide that stability that would enable the development of these lower carbon and innovative energy solutions. Shell Malaysia is committed to work closely with the government, industry, and customers to support the development of these policy frameworks that ultimately will incentivize future investment. At the same time, though, our commitment is to drive down emissions from our own operations. We want to ensure that our value chains and the operations that we run are the best that it can be from a carbon performance perspective. The bulk of our emissions, though, do come from the use of the products that we sell. And it is here that, our efforts will make the most difference. So that's why we want to place customers at the center of our transition strategy and work with them, helping them understand alternatives to the products and providing these solutions to them too. So thanks so much to allow me to say a few opening remarks, and I look forward to the lively discussion with the rest of our fellow panelists. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ivan. It's very interesting. We're going to start this first question pretty much aligned with our first poll question. And actually, this question came through from the audience about why 2065 isn't that much later than most other countries in the world. And the poll results overwhelmingly said 2065 is too long. Right, and I personally think it's too long too. But so why 2065? And anyone can start. Maybe Ivan, we'll start with you. Why 2065?
Okay, I'll start, and I welcome, of course, the thoughts. I guess the point at which Malaysia is able to achieve the carbon neutrality really depends on how aggressively we make those choices from today. The pathways that are described in the tree, sky, and the sun, will be dependent on those increased levers that we talked about, which was around renewables, electrification, energy efficiency, how carbon pricing plays into this. I think as we make those choices in time, and I think, Tengku Taufik mentioned it before, I think this pathway is what the future could look like. But as we understand how all these factors play into this and how we're able to take these choices much more promptly, I do believe that the transition to a low carbon energy system can be faster. I think this is a starting point for ourselves, and the year 2065 was arrived through a combination of modeling that was done by Shell using the models that we have used also for our Sky model, but most importantly, in consultation with the diverse group of stakeholders, and many of which are around this table, to help us provide this balanced view of how Malaysia could trade off all those issues to get to a carbon neutral economy.
Right. Would anyone else like to add to that?
Yeah. Can
Yes.
I do it?
Yes, Dr. Sri.
Yeah. First of all, this report is not by the ministry. And then, can I share my slide, please? You get my slide?
Does the technical team have a copy of the slide?
Share screen. Yeah. This report is not by the ministry, so I cannot say that this is what we are going to have. This is a scenario developed by Shell, and at the ministry we have no. We don't claim credit anything from this study. It is not based on what UNFCCC required us to do. And this is not mandatory for us to develop as what Shell is doing. This is based on Shell's scenarios on what's business going to be in this region in the future in relation to carbon neutral businesses, I think. Let me tell you what is required. Despite one of the panels mentioned that more than 100 countries have said that they have done things and that, to tell you frankly, many countries, they just do it. And what is required by UNFCCC, they have not done it. Yeah, I don't want to name the countries, but what we follow is what is required by Paris Agreement. And we do it correctly. Last year, say for example, despite difficulties of COVID-19, we were able to manage to send our BUR 3. You can check which other countries in this region sending BUR 3 online. I'm saying that not many countries can able to do it. That shows our commitment. The basis for the future will be our baseline data. Without baseline data, I'm very sure all of us are professional here. Without baseline data, we cannot forecast for the future. So baseline data is very important. So this is what is required by UNFCCC. Every year, we have to do it every 4 years, national communication every 4 years, biennial update report every 2 years. We have done it last year. Biennial transparency report will be 2024. We are discussing tomorrow night at 9 to 2 o'clock in the morning for two nights, and followed next week. We are going to discuss with UNFCCC together with our ministers, not only from Malaysia, but many countries, on the details on biennial transparency report 2024. Yeah, so, and according to Paris Agreement, we have to do nationally determined contribution. And then the report that prepared by Shell is about long-term low emission development. It is required, and we don't call it any reports. We call it LTLEDS. It's very specific in the agreement. So we have to send the report when required. We are non-Annex 1 country, so we have to understand our position. We are not Annex 1 country. We are non-Annex 1 country. So we follow through what is required based on our submission to UNFCCC. And this is our action plan. Yeah. So I am telling you this because I don't want to commit, especially my staff, to commit with various agreements or various policies when we have to spend time on it. And this is hell, a lot of money and times to do it. Yeah. So and this is what we are trying to do this year and next year. First, our NDC. NDC is nationally determined contribution, what Malaysia is going to do by 2030. And we have chance to do it by Q2 this year, which is this month, we have to complete. So this gives you an indication what is our commitment. And this commitment must be very serious because we get everyone to agree on it, not just, and then we send it to cabinet for approval, and then we will be able to send it to UNFCCC. That is our national commitment. That will be the earliest by July this year, or the latest by August. That's very important before we can go for National Communication 4 and BUR 4 by 2024. Yeah, so, and what we are trying to do at the moment is to develop our climate change legal framework. This is Q3, and then carbon market mechanism is to be ready by Q4. And we would like to change our climate change policy in 2009, and our long-term low emission development strategy. When are we going to decarbon, or what are going to be net zero again? That is based on LTLEDS. So according to the plan, it's supposed to be 2024 for non-Annex 1 country. Yeah, we can say something interesting, but there is no commitment from the government later.
Right.
And what we can do now is to develop our NAP and Greenhouse Gas Center, which I think will be available by Q4 this year. So we are working on this. Then derive when is the time appropriate for Malaysia to have net zero or carbon neutral. Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Dr. Sri. Just something that you mentioned as well. There is no commitment. What do you mean by that? With certain elements.
This is the timeline as required by Paris Agreement. I'm saying, despite we are non-Annex 1 country, we have that commitment.
Right.
Okay. And then meet all the obligations as required. Say, for example, you can ask Datin Sunita. Last year, we managed to submit 2020, December 30th, our BUR3, which is mandatory it's not mandatory. I will say that it's required by Paris Agreement.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Dr. Sri. And of course, we'll get to other questions later. Dave, I know you have your view about this as well.
Yeah, thank you, Freda, and thank you, Dr. Sri, for the comments. I was very encouraged to see the overwhelming response of being able to go faster. That was certainly very, very encouraging. And I thought it'd be helpful to reflect on some of the themes that could actually drive a faster ambition. right? So, and a few of them, let me just share. So technology. So we've seen consistently, historically, that we have always underestimated technology cost curves across renewables, across batteries, across hydrogen. A funny story on hydrogen. When I looked at hydrogen with some clients maybe 3-4 years ago, commerciality was 100 years away. And now, you look at hydrogen, we're talking about decades, right? So these things change very quickly. I think technology is one. The second driver that may catalyze fast action is investors and where they put their dollars. And this is really changing quite quickly, right? And where they put their dollars will really shape the sectors and the economies and where companies invest. The third piece is around multilateral action and regional collaboration. So this is a problem for everyone, and this is it's a problem that's best addressed with scale, right? So with multilateral action, whether it's countries getting together or DFIs funding some of the more challenging investments, you can start to get scale. In Southeast Asia, and I'll share one example. The region is actually quite advantaged in carbon capture and storage. There's natural sinks where you can store, but any individual project will not work economically. But if you scale across borders, and if you scale the concentration of CO2 and you capture it in across Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, as an example, the economics start to change, right? And now it's not economical today, but the time frame starts to compress. And the last thing I'd say is that what others do will also impact the pace, right? So if you have major policy action from major economies, major trading partners, we talked about a carbon price coming into effect. Now imagine a carbon price that impacts Malaysia imports and exports. If you have border adjustment mechanisms that converge on a price that is expected to really shift investments in green, and this is in the range of $50 to $80 per ton. If that happens faster than expected, then again, you have acceleration in the economy. So I think there are a number of factors that could really drive pace and speed here.
Right. Thanks, Dave. Okay, I just want to get to our second poll question, right? According to our attendees, this was the ranking in terms of priority for carbon neutral journey. And the first one is reforestation and forest conservation. I was looking at this earlier on, right? And then following energy efficiency and renewables and energy mix, electrification and carbon pricing. So your thoughts, is this the right order? Is this the right way? The chicken and egg kind of question, what must come first to be most effective? Well, I'll address this to Ivan again first.
So I was going to, maybe Datin Sri should go first to give her the chance to come in.
Yeah. It's okay. I wanted to jump in on the previous points raised by Datin Sri KSU, and of course echoed by Dave, about the Shell scenario. I think it's very clear that, the government has an uphill task ahead of them. And it's like a giant aircraft carrier. It is so difficult to pivot. And so I can fully understand CASA's view as the ministry tasked for our NDC reporting. They really have a huge workload set up in front of them. In the meantime, from the private sector's perspective, we're facing multiple tsunamis. As Dave has pointed out, allocators of capital, financial markets, which are forward-looking, are pulling this risk forward. Central banks, the NJFS now has 95 members and 15 observers. They are also very concerned about the systemic risk that this is going to cause on the financial system. Trading partners don't want to be accused of outsourcing their carbon footprint, so they don't want to deal with countries with no or low climate ambition. There's a very real likelihood of Malaysia being removed from the global supply chain unless we can clearly demonstrate what our climate ambitions are. And so this is why it'd be useful to have a significantly stronger policy signaling from the government and the regulatory authorities as well. Because I think the consensus is clear. We do need bold action on climate change. The impact of humans on climate disruption, mass extinction, air pollution is extremely high. And this leads to a high probability of risks that we might not be able to manage. We now have unequivocal evidence that we have entered a decisive decade. We need to halt biodiversity loss now. We need to cut emissions by half over the next 9 years. And another very telling example, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, has issued 5 previous assessments of scenarios of what the world is looking forward to. And the range of warming is between 1.5 degrees to 4.5 degrees Celsius. But in the upcoming IPCC 6 assessment, that range has now been compacted to 2.3 degrees of warming to 4.5 degrees. This means we no longer have a range that starts at 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming. And so, of course, an element of science-based fear is important, but people like Johan Rockstrom are articulating very clearly that an approach of just raising awareness and encouraging a willingness to pay the green premium is a short-sighted approach as well. And it feels like a trade-off. People feel like they have to choose between wealth and protecting the planet. So we need to find a new way of communicating, and everyone needs to participate in this conversation because this is an existential risk which will affect everyone.
Right. What do you mean by a new way of communicating?
Well, and so this is why we're having the series of roundtable conversations, for example, you know, to get as many stakeholders around the table so that we don't just have this parochial attitude, why isn't someone else doing something? Let's all take part in this conversation. The more minds that are addressing this issue, the more good solutions we are going to have, isn't it? And then it's also capacity building so that everybody understands why it's not as simple as Datuk Sri was saying. You can't just say, oh, tomorrow or next year, or, you know, this is a long-term decision, and we all need to collectively understand why we are doing this.
Right. So, you know, which links to the panel question as well, right? You know, reforestation and forest conservation being the order priority. You know, what are your views around that?
Actually, Climate Governance Malaysia has just launched the Hornbill Award for biodiversity conservation. So we want to try and provide some funding to the NGOs that are in such a difficult time. I think absolutely Malaysia is one of 7 countries of mega biodiversity because of our long coastline. So there's also marine biodiversity as well. And this is something, you know, if you have karst hills, limestone caves out in Kinta Valley, for example, that is over 300 million years old. If these are being destroyed, you can't just contribute to a fund and go to a shop and buy the biodiversity back again. If it is extinct, it's gone extinct, and we don't even know what we've lost, and we don't understand what the implications are. The bottom line is that so much of what we do is destructive to the environment, and every individual needs to be so much more mindful about our actions and the implications it has on the environment.
Right. Before I ask anyone, I just want to, I guess, get both you, Datin Sri, and also Datuk Sri as well. You know, we talk about this behavior change, right? This behavior change, you alluded to it as well, Datuk Sri. What is that behavior change that needs to come from the individual? And I wanted to address that later, but I think this is crucial to just bring it up right now when we talk about a culture.
Well, do you have this?
Yes, we can see that.
Okay. I have been in this position since last year. And prior to that, we had KETA, Kementerian Tenaga Alam, Teknologi Hijau dan Air. So my little experience in heading a ministry is this. Before that, the Ministry of Education, Higher Education, and whatnot. Whatever policy that you ask government to do, we can have discussion to have it. We can have planning, strategy. So this is we are launching a new plan or strategy by Shell or whoever. Next is implementation. So this, I think 99% of our concentration and resources must be put into implementation. And at the end of implementation, we create something, we get some kind of outputs. But this is merely in organizational form. Say, for example, we built a power plant, say, for example, solar power plant. So that is not relating to behavior at all, because this is engineering solution. And then after that, people are behaving differently. If you want to change behavior, we have to change personal domain. And what we do in life is only 5 to 10% behavioral. More than 90% are habitual. The way you dress yourself, taking shower and whatnot, this is habitual. How much water you use, how much electricity you use, this is mainly habitual. In order to do that, as Datin Sunita mentioned, we need public participation. And this is the key that can bring organizational domain to personal domain. And behavior is very expensive. If you want to change behavior, you can read a lot of books. What we can do is just to change people on the street by having more street lighting or having CCTV on the street. But 99% of the time, people they realize that they are not in that situation. They can do whatever they want to do. So that is behavior. And behavior is very punitive. We need punitive, we need incentive. It's very expensive. So I put it like this. If we have environmental policy, we can only work on organizational domain and partly on behavior. We will not be able to tackle habitual. Habitual change is ecological philosophy domain. So I'm so sorry, I wrote some books. So if you look into Western ecological philosophy, when they talk about carbon footprint, people can realize the importance because they are based on scientific evidence and whatnot, because they are in that behavior. I mean, they're in that mindset. But when you talk to Japanese, they don't call it carbon footprint, they call it motainai. And for Muslims, say for example, if you want to ask Muslim community to change because of carbon footprint, it's very difficult. But if you say that this is halalan and tayyiban, they will act upon it. So that's how we address, by having ecological philosophy strengthened. Countries where I would say that sustainability is very high, they have very unique ecological philosophy. I'm writing with my colleagues on Scandinavian ecosophy, why they are behaving like that. Because their ecological philosophy, not their environmental policy. The environmental policy help, that is on organizational domain. They are willing to surrender their cars. They are willing to stay in a very small apartments and walk to work because of ecological philosophy, not because of environmental policy, largely. Thank you.
Thank you, Dato Sri.
If I may
sure.
comment, Freda, I think, Dr. Sri, thanks for sharing those sort of philosophies around this. And I think the tree, sky, and the sun is a scenario of what the world could look like. And it's really to just get the, open conversations around what are the levers we need to do to achieve this. And the transition to a low carbon system will unfold at, different paces for different countries. And I think, depending on the local factors, as Dato Sri has mentioned just now, in some countries, there's an innate ecological way of actually living, that there's a societal commitment to it. And the countries that can move faster should. And, in time, as we build this sort of, I like this climate culture, and I guess going back to the poll, I think energy efficiency is one of those areas that really works towards that cultural fit a bit better. Because this is the one where, you're building awareness, you're building that desire to actually do things differently. Because if we don't get efficient in the way we use energy, that growth in demand will be so big that we're going to find it really hard to plug with even the rate of technology implementation on renewables and the like. So we've got to get that demand right. And then once we've got that demand fit for purpose, then we've got the real opportunity then to put in the technologies that Dave talks to, like the hydrogens, like the renewable growth, to then be able to substitute and really transition across to that. So I do feel that, in many businesses today, even in my own, in Shell, we are still learning our vocabulary when it comes to carbon. Right. We're traditionally strong in the fundamentals around safe, reliable operations. And I think this is an area where we need to build our understanding around our carbon vocabulary as well, so that it goes hand in hand with a license to operate for ourselves. And I think we're on that sort of learning journey ourselves. I certainly am myself.
Right. Interesting. Anyone would like to add on to that? If not, but interesting, Dr. Sri, with ecosophy as opposed to philosophy. Now, I want to go into the next question, which is, current climate policies in Malaysia, are we on the right track, right? And I guess, what we've got with the results here, if we can quick look at the results, I don't think we are. We are, okay, according to this, yes, 470, we need a more integrated approach to climate change policy. And I think we're on this same vein of discussion, and this whole integration, sometimes we feel like, one party's doing this, one party's doing this, but are we all getting together to do this, and what needs to get everyone working together? Who would like to address this question?
I think, whether we need new policies or, it's very easy to say we need, but it's so complex, isn't it, to implement new policies, and so much work needs to be done behind the scenes. So of course, the Roundtable series is helping because we are calling in key stakeholders from industry who have already many times made policy recommendations to the government. They've already worked very closely with key ministries. We're also inviting civil society organizations, especially NGOs, to join in this conversation because they have been doing this work for decades and they're very familiar with what the weak spots, what the blind spots are. And so, yes, I mean, we will always need policy recommendations. I think we've got to be open about that because there's this concept of dynamic materiality. Materiality now is not just a percentage of your revenue and profits and net assets, but looking forward, because the business environment, the world environment is changing. It's so volatile and uncertain that you need to be constantly on the lookout. And so I think policies need to be ready to pivot when circumstances change.
Right. And I want to ask as well, right? We say that we need to have more integration, right? What could hinder progress? And if we need more effective policy, maybe I'll ask the consultant here, Dave. What could hinder progress, and what can we do, to make sure that we're a little bit more cohesive?
Yeah, thanks, Frida. And maybe just reflecting on the poll results on let's say greater integration and so on. I think we're getting into that phase in this climate transition where climate and economic policy start to converge and become one and the same, right? Meaning that we're talking about massive transformations of the economy. Some sectors will grow, some sectors will decline, jobs will change. Skills that are needed will change, right? So all of this is coming to a head, and it's accelerating in momentum. So when we think integrated policy, we're in that window now where we can't have climate policy and everything else, right? It's almost climate transition policy in the context of how the economy is going to compete, how it's going to grow, how it's going to transition over the coming decades. So, and it is very complicated, as Datin Sri Sunita had mentioned, right? There is multiple unknowns as we shape policy. We have unintended consequences that we will not be able to predict until we've actually done it. My view is that you set an ambition and you go, but you constantly have to steer and adjust, right? It's not one that you set a path and is linear. It's likely to be zigzag in many ways. And I'll share one example just to illustrate. Many countries have taken electrification of mobility, right? Many have started to set up ambitious plans to phase out internal combustion engines and EVs. Now, just in this one area where you need to have the cost curves of EV and internal combustion coming down to parity, you need to have the infrastructure in place. You need to have the right products so that consumers are willing to take these up. The countries that we've looked at, they've all had multiple paths that they've taken, and they've learned from making mistakes. They've overbuilt charging, for example. So when you scale back, you've had too much incentives in one area, then you scale back. You've privatized some part of it; it didn't work, so you make it public. So there's no linear path in this, right? I think what it requires is a constant watching the signals and adjusting as we go, and it is integrated, as many on the panel have said.
Right. Okay. Anyone like to add to that? Okay. If not, this is the next question is what needs to change now, right? So overwhelming response is better nationwide coordination, monitoring, and enforcement of policies. I think we've talked about that at length. Incentives that promote energy efficiency and consumer behavior will also touch a little bit on that. I'd like to bring up the second point, incentives that promote energy efficiency. Is that the way to go? Do we always need, is that the, incentives? And that's how only then will people react. Who would like to take that first? Dave.
I'm just reflecting on the results, Frida.
Right.
Thank you. This is not a cop-out answer, but really, you need to think of it. I don't think any one intervention works in itself, or you could prioritize one or the other. You really do need to do all of it.
Right.
I don't think it's a simple answer. That if you do this, then everyone will be incentivized to move in a certain direction. But I think if I can just recap, what I feel, because they need to be motivated to act, right? And so if as an individual, you think that we are in the middle of an existential crisis, climate, biodiversity, pollution, if you think that this part of the world is going to be disproportionately affected, if you agree that we are lagging in adaptation efforts, if you think that we do lack access to real-time granular data, which leads to better informed decisions, better allocation of capital, if you think that our products and goods are no longer going to be welcome in our largest trading partners who have declared climate ambition, then carrying on in the existing trajectory is a race to the bottom. Right? And I think individuals need to understand this and be mindful about this. A few months ago, we had a declaration by 126 Nobel laureates. This is a world record. Never before have we seen such a global uprising of Nobel Prize winners. And they issued an emergency call from science to humanity, calling for reason, truth, and humanitarianism, because we need this transformation to an equitable, safe, prosperous future. So I think this is what individuals need to understand. That will motivate them.
Can I say something?
Yes, sure.
Yeah, thank you, Datin Sunita, for raising that issue. So what I'm trying to stress here, the importance of people to understand the situation and willingly to contribute. Some people, they ask for everything, but not willing to contribute. I give you an example. We want the best water services in the country, but we are paying the cheapest in this region, water tariff. So it's not compensate. It must be reciprocal. It must be shown by your commitment. I give you an example. My friend in Sweden is paying close to 10 euro per cubic meter of water. And he and his wife only use about 4 cubic meter water per month. In Malaysia, we give free 20 cubic meter. That's the policy that can win election. And many people believe that that's the way, a good policy for the country. I give you an example, why water? Because you want to extract water, you need energy. You want to process water, you need energy. You want to, say for example, to distribute water, you need energy. So 40% of the OPEX of water operators are related to energy services. So what I'm saying here, we have to show our commitment through not only our words, but our action, our deeds. So I'm afraid we are asking for everything at cheaper price.
Right.
If I may also, chime in here, I think one of the key things that, as a private investor, but any investor, you look for certainty as well as stability in any investments that we make. And, if you look at what we expect of the technologies and the rate of pickup, this is, at a scale that has never been imagined before. And the expectation is that these are big investments that will happen over a long period of time. So stability in the policy, the incentives that are in place, the policies that are in place are going to be really important, in addition to how you actually frame those policies, that stability, that certainty, because when you make these investments, ultimately, we do it purposefully, but also, at an expected rate of return.
I think that what that is really about, this race to the bottom, I think that's a very scary picture, right? And when we look at it and understand it from how this will affect the country, how will it affect the society, how will this affect the individual, I think we need to sort of maybe paint that picture so that people understand. Now, what I'm going to do is I still have some more questions, but I also have audience questions, and I will, of course, there are all those that are the most popular questions, right? Get a huge tick, so I'm going to go through that in that order. So I'll intersperse with my questions and this. And this is a lot of people asking us, personally, I think Malaysia's movement towards a carbon neutral future is too slow. Is there anything we can do as employees to speed up the process? The rest of Shell seems to be moving much faster. So, Ivan?
Yeah. Okay, this one I'll take probably from one of the Shell staff that have joined in. Thanks for joining the discussions and asking the question. As we said, this is a scenario for a starting point for a discussion for Malaysia, of course, and it's exciting to be part of a conversation with esteemed colleagues around this table. I think, we've got some really good grassroots organizations that we've set up within Shell, like the Future Energy Alliance, that really starts to create awareness and builds excitement around this, because this is where we talk about, building that culture. And I think, as we do more, as we start to increase our vocabulary around this, we really become operationally excellent in managing our business. I think there will be opportunities to get involved in new type of business models in the new areas as we understand, the uptake of these levers like hydrogen, like renewables, reforestation opportunities and the like. But I think, it's a combination of things that we've got to do. And I think the starting point is that, we've got to ensure that this is something that we need to cooperate with different parties in our society, right? So there's a role for government to play, there's a role for investors to play, but there's also that societal element around building awareness and getting involved and making small steps each day.
Another question here, which kind of links nicely to a question that I have for Dave later. But what is the ministry's plan to protect our nature reserves and green lungs in both Semenanjung and Borneo? At the rate we are flattening the forest, it is very alarming. Dato Sri, perhaps you'd like to take that question?
First of all, it is a government responsibility. I'm not saying the ministry. My ministry is not involved in forestry. It is under KETSA. So I'm not speaking on behalf of KETSA. But in general, we have 100 million trees plantation programs that launched recently by government to show our commitment to have more trees in the country. And second, we yesterday we had meeting, very important meeting. Any development on I cannot mention specific area, but in specific location where the slope is identified, there will be no construction allowed. Yeah, so I think the policy has been formulated, and we are trying to find ways and means to implement it, especially using EIA mechanism. Despite you have 0.3 hectares of land on certain type of slopes, you are not allowed to do that. Yeah, or you have to do EIA, despite it is only 0.1% of the acreage that you are trying to develop. So that kind of emphasis is given. But sometimes we have to understand as well, in order to reroute that, you have to have additional 78 million budgets just to ensure that you don't pass through that site. So this is something that government is trying very hard to overcome. So as I mentioned, it requires a lot of financial strength in order to implement, and we need more money for that.
Right. If no one has anything to add, Dave, can you give us an insight into the work being done with WWF for Malaysia and how we benchmarking against other countries, and what can we learn from them?
Thanks, Freda. So WWF and BCG are currently engaged together with close collaboration with CGM and Datin Sunita and team on looking at what could be the potential macroeconomic and socioeconomic pathways for the country. So taking a view, what does it take to get to net zero, as the Shell study had laid out the technical potential, looking at what does it mean for the country in terms of sector growth, jobs, GDP, trade, impact on the broader society and economy. So that's what we're working on together with the WWF and with broad engagement to shape and provide a perspective that can be used as a resource for various constituents in their plans and actions that they may take. So that's the intent. I think what we're seeing is that when you start putting it all together, right? When you start putting in all the transition that one can envisage in terms of the sector growth and where there will be transformations, it is net positive for the country, right? That's no doubt. And I think and we've seen that through multiple studies that point to the net benefit is accretive. The challenge is always transition, right? How do you manage the next 10 years, the next 20 years in that transition, and how can this be done in the most fair, just, equitable way that is that benefits all, right? And doesn't leave anyone behind. I think this is really the big challenge that we're seeing, not just in Malaysia, but in many countries where we worked on these climate pathways with both the public sector and the private sector. So that would be no easy answers on this one, but going back to the earlier point that we were discussing, setting an ambition and then taking action and correcting and course correcting as you go is probably the only path that one can imagine.
Right. Thanks. Okay, I have a question here for Datin Sri, right? And you sit on several boards, right? What do boards have to do to make this the top agenda for companies? Because I think that falls a lot on the shoulders of the companies. What needs to change and be amended as you sit on boards as well when you I guess consult them?
Yeah, well, actually, directors are long-term stewards for the organization, and so they need to be aware of how this top financial risk relates to their legal duties and disclosure obligations. So climate risk is a top financial risk, it's an investment risk, and this is resulting in a significant reallocation of capital, whether by investors, bankers, insurers. And it's very clear that the cost of inaction is going to be significantly higher than the cost of action. So some consequences is that transparent disclosure are critical for investors now to have a sense of whether the company is on the right track, especially if it's Paris aligned. And this is acting as a proxy to the quality of management and director thinking as well. You need to align numbers if you want to align behaviors. What gets measured gets done, and what gets rewarded definitely gets measured. So you want to align executive compensation with climate transition priorities. Are we misstating earnings of corporations all around the world if we are not pricing in the cost of pollutants or environmental destruction, which impairs our ability to be resilient, for example? And investors are voting against the nomination of directors who do not appear to be steering their companies towards a decarbonization pathway. So the director's obligation is to ensure that the right process is being followed. And this is why implementing climate governance throughout the organization is important. Climate literacy, not necessarily being climate experts, but that all directors are sufficiently climate literate that they understand about this existential risk.
Which is kind of, I want to bring up this question, right? And this is, I guess, to the Minister of Environment, but in just thoughts on everybody else as well. To introduce a carbon tax, is that when we'll start paying attention when there's a tax? And that's one of the questions from the audience. Dr. Sri, your view, perhaps?
I will share this because I don't want to be wrongly quoted, okay? This is very sensitive. Okay, first of all, we have to have climate governance first. Otherwise, we do, I think we have to coordinate our actions. When, say, for example, we want to have carbon tax in the future, what is the purpose and whatnot. But what is also important, I think, is to have an approach on planetary health. It is now our philosophy in the ministry. We are going to work based on planetary health, and this is in the smaller framework or micro framework. We call it donut economy. So we want to work with Johor Bahru, Kuala Lumpur, Melaka, Ipoh, Kajang, or something like that. Yeah. So we work within that framework, and easy for us to do a lot of things. I don't want to make it too big. We don't want to make it too big because it will be very difficult to see the impact. And we would like to have funding in place. So this is something important for us. Through climate governance, we'll be able to have dedicated funding. Yeah, so I'm not saying that tax is the first one. We have GST in place in the past, so you can see the impact. People in Malaysia, as I mentioned, they like everything first class, but no pay. Okay.
Okay, which I guess I'd like to open the floor as well to Dave and Ivan and Datin Sri, right? I mean, where countries have implemented carbon tax, you see then greater willingness, greater participation because there is a carbon tax.
Carbon tax is something that we cannot understand fully in the country. As I mentioned earlier, when we talk about carbon, I have to explain what carbon was. Yeah, so to the extent, some people thought carbon is carbo, you know, when you eat a lot of carbo, so that's carbon for them. So I have to do a lot of education. Therefore, I emphasize on communication, education, and public awareness first. So we have to go on this first, and then we get people on board, and later we can include carbon tax somewhere. But we have to make people understand what carbon is all about first.
Thanks, Dr. Sri. Viewpoints from the others?
Maybe a couple of quick thoughts on this. Fred, I think it has to be done in a staged way. You know, wherever you know, wherever we may take carbon tax and pricing it, there's a step of establishing the right fundamentals to be able to measure and create transparency around this. Now, without that, it's impossible to have any meaningful tax. So I think there's that. The mechanisms and infrastructure needed for that. There's a step around signaling as well, because you need companies to be able to adjust and modify how they operate, and you can't slap a big tax, you know, at the get-go and expect that things will change. It'll be gradual signaling at a ratcheted up price, and ultimately, I mean, all the evidence points to what we know today. I mean, this could change, you know, with technology and so on. But what we know today is that you need a $50 to $80 US dollar carbon price for many of the investments to make sense, right? So so it requires a flight path to get to this level in a reasonable amount of time.
Right. And if I may add to that, I mean, I do feel that, you know, there is a role for carbon pricing and within Malaysia as well to get us to a net zero emissions outcome. You know, carbon pricing can be through tax, can be through an emissions trading system, or you could use, you know, a more regulatory approach like having performance standards, for example. I think in the longer term, you know, the market-based type of carbon pricing mechanism is probably the most cost-effective way of driving this change. Right? But I think, you know, implementing it nationally, you've got to also ensure that there is a link to a wider international market, you know, in line with the Paris Agreement, and it's applicable across sectors and across different countries, so that you have a very clear, and to the point that Dave mentioned, a consistent, you know, signal that the energy system is trying to achieve globally the net zero emissions target. Right? So I do think that, you know, and what does actual carbon tax actually mean, and maybe in simplistic terms for folks that are not familiar with this to help as well is, you know, someone explained it to me this simplistically. So if you had $100 per ton of carbon tax, and you were today emitting, let's say, 1 million tons of CO2 equivalent, then it's $100 multiplied by the 1 million tons that you emit. And therefore, your business would now have to have an extra cost of $100 million a year.
Right.
That's what it means, right? So there are implications, of course. You can imagine those are big numbers when you start to look at carbon tax or carbon pricing starting to go up. And I think today, the average globally, they correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think it's around the $20 mark on average around the world right now. But some countries have pegged themselves a lot higher, of course.
I think that's such an excellent example, Ivan, because a lot of people don't fully understand this. There is a very high risk that we are misstating corporate profits, because there is a recognition that this pollution is damaging lives and that there is a cost to this as well. So Goldman Sachs has imputed a price of $80. EU's exchange trading scheme breached 50 euros. Swiss Re is using internal shadow pricing of $100. Something that I personally would like to propose, and I hope this is picked up by the roundtable sessions, is to mandate shadow pricing. This won't have an impact on profits or cash flow. It can be mandated relatively quickly, and it will clearly demonstrate if, in the example that Ivan gave, if corporate profits are misstated. You can have a very simple greenhouse gas calculator. It's not difficult, because at the end of the day, we urgently need capacity building. We are at a stage where we should be even mandating climate education in schools, for example. We are very possibly the first generation that can do anything seriously about this, but we are definitely the last generation that can do anything about this. We have children, 30% of the world's population is 20 years old and below. They have the least responsibility for this crisis, and yet they are going to bear the most burden. And so we really need to think of easy, quick wins. I think mandating shadow pricing is a quick win. Mandating climate education is a quick win.
Right. Very interesting. Can you elaborate a little bit more about shadow pricing, and what does that mean when companies see this, and how will that affect a change in behavior organizationally?
Okay, so in Ivan's example, 1 million tons of CO2, for example. And there are some government agencies that are already working on a sort of calculator for individuals, for companies. So you just punch in, let's say, your tenaga bill or your operations, the industry that you're in, and you have a number of what your CO2 footprint is. And maybe you can even apply any carbon price that you want. $1, $2, $5, $100, it's entirely up to you. But what does this added disclosure provide? Immediately, the allocators of capital, your investors, your bankers, your insurers, they have an immediate line of sight as to what your carbon footprint is. And in their conversations with you, they will also have a very clear view as to whether you understand the enormity of this problem. Are you benchmarking against best practices or against industry? Are you planning to set your own targets? At some stage, are you going to embed sustainability into the DNA of your business? Do you understand planetary boundaries, for example? There are some businesses that are not going to survive this transition. So reporting and disclosure gives us a very clear line of sight as to which are the businesses that are going to make this transition.
Right, and maybe hence the hesitation if they're not going to survive this transition.
And this is why we need policy recommendations that help everybody across the finish line as far as possible.
All right. Okay, nothing to add. I think I have to ask this question, Ivan. Because it will definitely be brought up at some point, and this is the elephant in the room question, where Shell is advocating this transition to low carbon while at the same time continuing to explore and develop ONG, right? Is this hypocrisy? Is it a case of damn if you do, damn if you don't?
Yeah, no, thanks, Freda, for the question. We have announced by our CEO that we're not going to be exploring in frontier areas from 2025. Our oil production is going to be declining 1 to 2% year on year now. And we have started to invest billions of dollars in new models where we are trying to advance low carbon energy solutions like hydrogen, like renewables, biofuels, and the like. And in February this year, we actually announced a change in our strategy called Powering Progress. And that actually talks to how we're going to accelerate our business in Shell to become a net zero emissions business by 2050 or sooner, and instead the society, right? So, hand to heart, I do believe that Shell is taking steps as a global player in this market to really also have open and transparent discussions around the magnitude of the challenge that we are facing together. And it's going to require concerted effort by all parties around the table.
Right. Okay. So it is beyond, I mean, it's working not just with employees. I guess it's something that the conversation you have with all different areas, right? So I'm going to go through some questions, and of course this will be taken according to popularity in terms of number of votes, right? So here is, for Malaysia to be carbon neutral is part of our lifestyle change. For instance, can we ban plastics food container? And this was actually a question for the minister earlier on, but can we go for fiber non-toxic containers, biodegradable? Can anyone answer this question? And because this was addressed to Kwan earlier, YB earlier. Okay, who's not?
What was the question, please? I didn't get the question.
Oh, okay, the question is, for Malaysia to be carbon neutral, it is part of our lifestyle change. Just to talk about your ecosophy. For instance, can we ban polystyrene, plastics, food container if we were to do that? And then go for fiber non-toxic containers, biodegradable. I think, whatever the solution may be, can we think these things, and hence that will have a journey.
Okay, that's very interesting question. In order to answer that question, I think we develop a blueprint that is until 2030. And in order to do that, we have to negotiate with various parties, ministries, and to tell you frankly, it is a bit slower because we are also a major producer of that products in the market at the moment. And in order to, I would say that to replace with other ecological business related to packaging, so it takes time. So as far as government is concerned, the policy is already in place. I think we are going to, I mean, when I mentioned about policy, it must be integrated. It's not only Ministry of Environment and Water that leading. So for example, on licensing, that's under MITI, so we have to speak to MITI. On the health related, that is Ministry of Health. So it's a lot of procedures need to be changed for that matter. But to tell you frankly, we have done the initial work, and I think we put that in place probably Q3 this year. Yep.
Right. There were a couple of questions, especially addressed to YB. So I think you've also addressed some of them. So here's a question: what will the impact be on the Malaysia's economy while the world pursue the carbon neutral stance, right? And I think that picture where everyone's moving in that direction and we're not, right?
But someone has not understand my points. I'm saying that we are doing something, and the reporting when the date will be based on our LTL long-term low emission development strategy that's going to be in place starting next year. So the process is, as non-Annex 1 country, we have to use that opportunity because we can just announce it by 2050. But what is the plan? Who's going to be responsible to do this? Which ministry? And we are very complicated. State governments will say, I'm not going to implement that. So we have to negotiate with everyone, every single stakeholder in the implementation. So that takes time. Yeah, I'm not sure how other countries can do it very fast, but we follow the recommendation And we receive assistance from UNFCCC framework in order to implement what we plan to do. So just merely internal work. Say, for example, to do NDC, we have to comply with the calculation, with the, Datin Sunita knows about this, how we calculate. Therefore, when people ask about numbers, we say that this is approved by UNFCCC. We will be audited. In Glasgow this year, BUR3 will be audited. And I am responsible for government to answer all that question. Yeah, it's not like the one that we announced and then no one, except in Parliament. But in our context, whenever you submit to NUR, BU, NDC, or long-term low emission development strategy, it will be questioned. There will be auditors coming to check our seriousness, our strategy in place. Yeah, so it's a serious matter. It's not just, and in this situation, you can understand the difficulties in doing this.
Right. Just another question, and this is to Ivan, right? I'll get back to, can we see a detailed blueprint how Malaysia can achieve carbon neutrality by 2065? And would that be in the book?
Yeah, no, actually, great question. I would encourage, all members of the audience to read the Tree, the Sky, and the Sun storybook. I have it right in front here, actually.
Right.
Nearer, but it's got quite a bit of graphs and charts at the back with lots of data too. And it does describe the steps and the paths that, of a scenario that could eventuate to get us to carbon neutrality. And it also talks about, the different elements in a lot more detail than what we could have covered here this morning. So that will be available and that can be downloaded further.
Right. And we look at these conversations about what government can do, what corporations can do, what bodies can do, but what can consumers do? What can we as individuals do to make that change? Because it starts with the man in the mirror as well. Dave.
Indeed. Thanks, Freda. So maybe I'll frame this along. We've done some analysis looking out to 2050 in terms of emission pathways, and with the different blocks of let's say abatement that a consumer can influence, right? And what's interesting is that in Malaysia, given the carbon sinks with forests and so on, the consumer can actually impact quite a bit. Can impact 15 to 20% of emissions when you look out at 2050. And here it comes down to a number of choices. It comes down to choices around how you manage personal mobility, right? So whether it's you decide to acquire an EV vehicle, 10 years from now, whether you use public transport, whether you do shared mobility, all of this really impacts the footprint of transport in the country. And it's quite a major lever, right? And it's heavily driven by consumer choice. There's also, to a smaller extent, but certainly every million ton counts, dietary choices, right? So if you shift your dietary choices now, with a greater mix of plant-based food and diet. Actually, in Southeast Asia, more broadly, many countries are within the planetary boundaries of diet, to be honest. We're not meat consumers, right? So actually quite good. But we could of course push the needle a bit further and mix it up a bit more, and then there you can have more choice, right? So there are a number of things. Transport is a big one, and diet that impacts agriculture and land use. What the consumer can impact, and it's material when you look it out, to 2050.
Right. Yeah. I just of late, I'm just taking meat maybe 3-4 times a week and trying to have more vegetables, right? I still love my meat, but just reducing the amount of meat, right? Anybody like to add? I mean, just like in a personal thing, right? What can we do in terms of our behavior, our consumption behavior? Of course, the first removing the straw at first. Yeah. Yeah, Dr. Sri.
Yeah. Okay. In the ministry, starting from this year, we will evaluate the amount of kilometers we travel throughout, and we offset that with number of trees. So this is something that I would like to encourage others. Every 350 kilometer travel, I will plant a tree.
Right.
So that is commitment. Of people ask, can we subsidize? Is this tax deduction? So that kind of personal habits that we want to encourage. If you go for behavior, people ask, is that tax deduction or not? When people do it because they believe in it, and this is what people in Scandinavian are doing, they don't care about whether they get tax deduction or something.
Right.
They do it because they want to save life. They want to be a good citizen of the world. If you keep on asking, how can I calculate this, whether this can claim here and there, that's difficult. On top of that, I only take shower 3 minutes. Yeah, with 10 liters of water every time. I'm very serious.
Right.
And I try to cycle to work. I'm trying, yeah. So because of COVID, so there is no cycling these days.
Right.
So this is little thing that we can do. Therefore, when we talk about big things, policy of global nature and whatnot, sometimes I ask whether you can do it yourself, whether you can add 10 ringgits additional to save life, to reduce carbon on your scale, at your scale. Yeah, so this is something that I would like to have habitual change, more important than policy change. If many of us can do that, they are asking us, when can you have this? Yeah.
Can I add on a few more things? I think these are great suggestions, which I fully agree with. And a few other things that, to reduce your carbon footprint by maybe growing your own food, for example. I think that's possible. Separation of waste at source and being mindful about where this goes. So potentially you should have no organic waste in your home because it's being composted or things are being recycled, for example. And also mangrove reforestation, being part of initiatives because they sequester so much more carbon than a normal rainforest. So I think generally just being more mindful about your lifestyle choices.
Okay, just another point about how Dato' Sri you saying was cycling, right? Pragmatic suggestions that we need policy, taxpayer money to make our cities in Malaysia as a pedestrian and cycling friendly city in the tropics. Whether that's feasible, I mean, it's a great idea, but
yeah, that's supposed to be in the local plan. Yeah, I think many PBT local governments now trying to do that. In Bangi, say for example, in Putrajaya, they encourage people. I asked my colleagues at the ministry, those who stay in the radius of 5 kilometers to cycle to work. This is instruction by the Secretary General. And I travel less than 1 kilometer by cycle or walking. That's my principle of life. 1 kilometer less to go to Surau, to go to nearby places, I will cycle or I walk. Yeah, so if 10 million population do that, we can reduce our carbon emission by, say, for example, 20%. As simple as that, rather than you want to have carbon storage and whatnot. That costs government, I think, about 10 billion, and we are not sure whether we can reduce 1%.
Right. I have a question for you, Datin Sri. So I understand more roundtable discussions will be held, right? What conversations will these be around?
Okay, so it's going to be sectoral. So for the energy and transport sector, there are 5 roundtables planned. For property and construction, there's 4. We're planning ones for plantations, recycling, and hopefully something on open data, the need for more up-to-date data. And we also have knowledge sharing sessions by partners like BCG WWF. I think that's going to be 12th or 13th of August. So these are things that we're really looking forward to. Getting more stakeholders into the conversation, talking about what's needed, and being open to suggestions from anyone.
Right. It's very interesting you're talking about all these things and it makes sense. So can you elaborate a little bit more about open data?
Okay, so to be able to make informed decisions, we need access to data. Because otherwise it's difficult to assess, for example, which are the land areas at risk of flooding if there's rising sea levels. Meteorologically, how many degrees warmer are we already? Think City had done some really good work that showed that one city in Malaysia was already 6 degrees warmer compared to their benchmark, their reference year. So when you have more information like this, it becomes easier for businesses and industries, and of course investors, to understand where they should be putting their money.
Right. Thank you. I think we've addressed, the few more questions, but we've addressed the big ones. Maybe I'd like to, close off today's session with just, a couple of closing remarks from each of you. We'll start with you, Dato' Sri.
Yeah. I put a challenge to everyone: if we can reduce our personal energy consumption by 50% today. So I tell you what I'm going to do. I open my window and my curtain, and that's how I work these days.
Right. Instead of the air conditioning, all right. Datin Sri?
I think that's a great suggestion. Simple, practical suggestions like this. Well, what I also want to do is, we've spoken about the downsides and not being pessimistic, but you have to remember also, if this is really an existential crisis, anybody who's going to be part of the solution has a tremendous opportunity to create tremendous value. So I think people need to remember that as well.
Dave?
Thanks, Freda. I would just reflect that Malaysia is actually hugely advantaged through transition, right? I mean, with the forest, the access to renewables, the stable environment for the long term, there's so many advantages the country has, and I think there's an opportunity to push a more ambitious pathway, both in terms of scale and in terms of speed for the country.
And we'll get Ivan to close.
Thanks, Freda. And for myself, I guess, the bits that always stick out for me is that, this is going to require everyone's help and everyone's cooperation across government, businesses and society. And for, very simple examples, practical examples for individuals to take on, and for businesses to take on, for governments to take on, to make choices today that will help us one step at a time towards, a pathway that is carbon neutral. So really appreciated the conversations and the learning that I had around this table today.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for participating. And I know this is a conversation that needs to continue, is the dialogue that continue. And of course, from there, as action, right, as execution. And of course, we put emphasis with the parties that have great control, but we also have some control within ourselves, right? The things that we can control ourselves and things that we can do to make a difference. So thank you again, everyone, on behalf of Shell Malaysia for attending the launch of the Tree, the Sky, the Sun, as we endeavor to achieve net zero emissions by 2065. We also like to thank the Minister of Environment and Water and the Dutch Ambassador for gracing today's event. So for downloadable resource information, please visit the resources tab in the virtual portal. And apparently there were some technical issue earlier, but it's fixed now. So please refresh the webpage and visit resources to download the Tree, the Sky, the Sun resources and information. And the virtual portal will be available until this Friday, the 9th of July. There is also a post-event survey, so we'd like you to take part in that. And alternatively, do visit the website. That's shell.com.my/Tree, Sky, Sun, and look forward to a feedback email from us to help in making things better for you in our future events. And to our media friends, you may join the press briefing in the link that was sent to you separately. So with that, thank you, everyone. Here's wishing everyone good health and to stay safe. Have a pleasant day.